Christmas night draped the Central Park in white, golden lights shimmering across the frozen lake surface. Vivien Constance, the powerful chief executive officer, sat alone on a wooden bench, her fingers clenched around a cold coffee cup, isolated among distant carols drifting through the air. Suddenly, a blonde girl tugged at her sleeve, eyes wide and trembling. "Miss, you look exactly like the woman in my dad's painting." Vivien's heart stopped, because that painting should never have been seen by anyone. The snow fell heavier now, coating the park benches and the towering Christmas tree at the center of the square. Families gathered beneath it, children shrieking with delight as they threw snowballs and waited for Santa's arrival at the community event. But Vivien Constance remained motionless on her bench, 20 yards from the celebration, watching the scene as if through frosted glass. At 35, she was the youngest chief executive officer in the city's financial district. Her name appeared in business magazines beneath headlines about ruthless efficiency and record profits. Photographers captured her stepping out of black cars, her cream wool coat immaculate, her dark hair never out of place. But what the cameras never showed was this. Every Christmas Eve for 15 years, she came to this park alone. She sat on this exact bench until the cold numbed her fingers, then returned to her penthouse where no stockings hung and no tree stood decorated. The little girl who had spoken stood 3 feet away now, clutching a battered tin paint box against her red winter jacket. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with golden curls escaping from beneath a knitted hat and cheeks flushed pink from the cold. She had the habit of staring at people for a long time before deciding to speak, her gray eyes taking in every detail with an artist's attention. "I'm sorry," the girl said softly, not moving closer. "I didn't mean to bother you. It's just that you really do look like her. The woman in the painting. Even your coat is the same color." Vivien found her voice, though it came out rougher than she intended. "What painting?" The girl turned and pointed across the park, where a man stood at a folding table displaying sketches and watercolors to passers-by. "My dad painted it. A long time ago," he said. "Before I was born. It's of a woman sitting in this park during a snowstorm. She's wearing a cream coat and her eyes are so sad, and there's snow falling behind her, and she looks like she's lost something she'll never find again." The description struck Vivien like a physical blow. Every detail matched. The coat she wore that night 15 years ago. The snow. The bench. The expression that must have been on her face when she realized everything had been taken from her. "Where is this painting?" Vivien asked, her professional composure cracking. "At home. Dad keeps it in his studio. He never sells it, even when people offer money. He says it's the only thing he has left of that Christmas." The girl tilted her head, still studying Vivien's face. "Are you her? Are you the woman he painted?" Before Vivien could answer, a man's voice called out, "Larissa, don't wander off like that." The man approaching was in his late 30s, wearing a worn canvas jacket over paint-stained jeans. His dark hair was streaked with early gray, and he carried himself with the careful dignity of someone who had learned to hold his head high despite circumstances. When he saw Vivien sitting on the bench, his stride faltered. His expression shifted through recognition, shock, and something harder to name. "William," Vivien said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Vivien." He said her name like it tasted of old wounds. Larissa looked between them, her paint box rattling in her hands. Church bells began ringing from the cathedral 6 blocks away, marking the hour before midnight mass. The sound carried across the frozen park, each chime seeming to measure the 15 years that had passed since they'd last stood this close. William Hale had been a scholarship student at the Art Academy, talented but poor, working 3 jobs to afford supplies, while Vivien had been the daughter of the Constance family, heirs to a banking empire. They'd met at a gallery opening, fallen in love over coffee and conversations about Caravaggio and light. And when she'd gotten pregnant at 20, her family had moved with surgical precision to erase the mistake. The painting William had created that night had been an act of desperation. He'd come to the park searching for her after she'd disappeared, found only the bench where they used to meet, and painted the ghost of her from memory. He'd captured her sadness because he'd felt it himself. He'd painted the snow because it had been falling that night, and he'd kept the painting because he'd believed, for 15 years, that the baby in her womb had not survived whatever her family had done to separate them. The painting hung in his studio apartment in a frame he'd built himself. Larissa had grown up seeing it every day, asking questions her father couldn't fully answer. "Who is she?" the girl would ask. "Someone I knew a long time ago," William would reply. "Someone who was taken away during Christmas." And Larissa, with a child's understanding of loss, had accepted this explanation the way children accept that some things in the world are simply sad. Now, standing in the park with snow catching in his hair, William looked at Vivien and saw not the powerful executive from magazine covers, but the 20-year-old girl who had cried in his arms when she'd told him about the pregnancy. He saw the terror in her eyes then, and he saw something similar now, 15 years later, breaking through her polished exterior. "You look well," he said, his voice tight. "I look like I sold my soul," Vivien replied. "And I did." Larissa tugged at her father's sleeve. "Dad, is she the woman from your painting?" William didn't answer his daughter. He kept his eyes on Vivien, waiting for something, though neither of them could have said what. Vivien stood, her legs unsteady. The coffee cup fell from her hand, spilling dark liquid across the white snow. "I need to go." She walked away quickly, her heels clicking on the frozen path, leaving William and Larissa standing by the bench. The little girl watched her disappear into the crowd around the Christmas tree, then looked up at her father with questions in her eyes. "Dad," she said quietly, "why does she look so scared?" William picked up his daughter's hand. "Because sometimes the past comes back when we're not ready for it." Vivien's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city lights spreading to the horizon. The furniture was expensive and cold. A decorator had placed a Christmas tree in the corner of the living room, a perfect 7-foot specimen with artfully arranged ornaments. But there were no presents beneath it. There had never been presents. She poured herself scotch with shaking hands and stood at the window, watching snow fall past her reflection. Somewhere out there, in a modest apartment she'd never seen, William was putting his daughter to bed. His daughter. Not their daughter. He had raised her alone while Vivien had climbed corporate ladders and attended board meetings and pretended the hollow feeling in her chest was ambition. The memories came now, unbidden and sharp. The clinic where her father's lawyers had taken her the day before Christmas 15 years ago. The paperwork they'd made her sign, promising silence in exchange for a payout she'd never touched. The cold examination room. The doctor's face, sympathetic but paid for. And then the sedation, the darkness, and waking up alone on Christmas morning with her family telling her it was done. It was over. She could move forward now. They'd told her the pregnancy had been terminated. Medical necessity, they'd said. Complications, they'd said. She'd been young and frightened, and she'd believed them because what else could she do? And for 15 years, she'd carried the weight of that loss, had avoided children and families and Christmas celebrations because they reminded her of what she'd been forced to give up. But the child had lived. The realization hit her again, making her grip the Scotch glass so hard her knuckles whitened. Larissa was 8 years old, born in late spring, probably, which meant she'd been carried to term, which meant everything Vivien's family had told her was a lie. She called her private investigator at 11:30 on Christmas Eve. Marcus answered on the second ring, accustomed to odd hours and urgent requests from his most demanding client. "I need hospital records from 15 years ago," Vivien said without preamble. "Christmas week. Any private clinics in the area that handled obstetrics." cross-reference with the name Constance. And I need it fast. Tonight? Marcus asked. Tonight. She heard him moving, papers rustling, a laptop opening. What am I looking for specifically? Proof that I had a daughter, Vivien said, and proof that someone hid her from me. The investigation moved swiftly. Marcus had contacts in medical records departments who owed him favors. He had access to databases that technically weren't public but became available for the right price, and he had the skill to find threads that others might miss. By 3 a.m, he called back. I found alterations in the records from St. Catherine's private hospital. Your admission on December 23rd, 15 years ago. The discharge notes were modified 6 months after the original entry. Someone went back and changed the outcome from live birth to medical termination. The original notation is still visible in the digital timestamp history if you know where to look. Vivien closed her eyes. Who authorized the change? The request came from a law firm, Caldwell and Associates. They represented your father's estate, the same lawyers who had handled her family's affairs for generations, the same lawyers who had drawn up the silence agreement, the same lawyers who, she now understood, had orchestrated the entire deception. What happened to the child? She asked. Birth certificate shows the father as William Hale, mother listed as unknown. He took custody from the hospital directly. There's a note in the file that he'd been present during delivery, claiming paternity and requesting full parental rights. Hospital granted it, probably because they were told the mother had declined involvement. Declined involvement. As if she'd had a choice. As if she'd been conscious enough to make any choice at all. Over the following week, Vivien returned to the park every evening. She told her assistant she was taking early leave, told her board she was unavailable for meetings, and spent her time sitting on the cold bench watching William and Larissa from a distance. She watched William sell his sketches to tourists and couples, his prices modest, his smile genuine when people appreciated his work. She watched Larissa help her father pack up the folding table, carefully wrapping each drawing in protective paper, her small hands competent and careful. She watched them walk home together through the snowy streets, the little girl chattering about her day while William listened with patient attention, and she saw it. In the tilt of Larissa's head, in the way her mouth quirked when she found something amusing, in the stubborn set of her jaw when she disagreed with her father about something. The girl had Vivien's smile, her expressions, her mannerisms. How had she not seen it immediately? How had she sat on that bench and not known, instantly and completely, that this child was hers? Because she hadn't been looking. Because for 15 years she'd believed the lie. Because it had been easier, somehow, to think the baby was gone than to imagine she might be out there, alive and growing, being raised by someone else. On New Year's Eve, 1 week after the initial encounter, Marcus delivered the final piece of evidence. I found the nurse who was on duty that night. She's retired now, living upstate. She remembers the delivery because of how unusual it was. Young woman, sedated, family nowhere to be seen but their lawyers everywhere. The father showed up halfway through, frantic, somehow having tracked down which hospital. The lawyers tried to have him removed, but the medical staff wouldn't allow it. He was there when the baby was born. He cut the cord. He was the first person to hold her. Vivien sat in her office, the city celebrating below her window with fireworks and champagne toasts, while her world reconstructed itself around this new truth. William had been there. He'd fought his way into that delivery room. He'd claimed their daughter when Vivien couldn't. He'd kept her safe and raised her alone while Vivien had built an empire on the foundation of a lie. The fairy tale had it backwards, she realized. She wasn't the victim who'd lost everything. She was the villain who'd abandoned her child and spent 15 years climbing over the wreckage to reach the top. She found William's address in the phone directory and took a car service to his neighborhood, a working-class area near the industrial waterfront. The apartment building was old but well-maintained, with children's drawings taped inside the security door and the smell of someone's dinner cooking on the third floor. William's apartment was on the second floor. Through the door, she could hear Larissa's voice reading aloud from a book, stumbling occasionally over difficult words while her father gently corrected her pronunciation. Vivien stood in the hallway for 5 full minutes before she found the courage to knock. William opened the door. His expression shifted from surprise to guarded hostility when he saw her. "Not a good time," he said. "I know. I'm sorry. But I need to talk to you." "About what?" "About how you disappeared 15 years ago without a word? About how I searched for you for months until I finally accepted you'd chosen your family's money over us? What exactly do we have to talk about, Vivien?" Behind him, Larissa appeared in the doorway to the living room. The apartment was small but warm, with Larissa's artwork covering the refrigerator and a modest Christmas tree in the corner, strung with handmade ornaments and a few carefully wrapped presents. Everything about the space spoke of love and care and making do with less. "Dad?" Larissa said uncertainly. "Is that the lady from the park?" William's jaw tightened. "Go to your room, sweetheart." "But, please, Larissa." The girl looked between them, her gray eyes too knowing for 8 years old, then retreated down the hallway. William stepped into the hall, closing the door behind him. "Whatever you want," he said in a low, angry voice. "The answer is no. You made your choice. You don't get to show up now and—" "I didn't know," Vivien interrupted. "About Larissa. I didn't know she existed." William went very still. "What?" "My family told me the pregnancy was terminated. Medical emergency, they said. I was sedated when it happened. When I woke up, she was gone. They told me she was gone, and I believed them." Her voice cracked. "For 15 years, I believed them." She watched the information land, saw his anger transform into confusion, and then into dawning horror as he understood what she was saying. "You thought she died," he said slowly. "I thought I lost her. I thought I'd lost both of you. I thought you'd walked away because you blamed me for not fighting hard enough, for letting my family control everything." Vivien pressed her palm against the wall, needing something solid. "I didn't know you'd been there. I didn't know you'd taken her. I didn't know she was alive until I saw her in that park." William's face had gone pale. Behind the apartment door, they heard a soft thump, the sound of someone moving too quickly and bumping into furniture. Larissa had been listening at the door. The door opened. The little girl stood there, her paint box clutched against her chest like armor, her face white with shock. "You're my mother," she said to Vivien. "It wasn't a question. You're the woman in the painting. You're my mother and you didn't know about me." Vivien knelt down, bringing herself to Larissa's eye level. This close, the resemblance was undeniable. This was her daughter, her child, the baby she'd held for only seconds before the sedation had taken her under, the infant she'd mourned every Christmas, the life she'd built her empire trying to forget. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm your mother, and I'm so sorry I wasn't there." Larissa stared at her, then suddenly swayed. Her eyes rolled back, and she crumpled. William caught her before she hit the ground, his painter's reflexes quick. "Larissa!" The girl was unconscious, her breathing shallow, her skin clammy. Vivien grabbed her purse, already pulling out her phone. "I'm calling an ambulance. She has a heart condition," William said, his voice tight with fear as he carried his daughter back into the apartment. "Stress can trigger episodes. There's medication in the bathroom cabinet. White bottle." Vivien ran. She found the prescription, read the label with shaking hands, brought it back to where William had laid Larissa on the couch. He administered the medication with practiced efficiency, then pressed his fingers to her wrist, counting her pulse. The paramedics arrived 12 minutes later. They loaded Larissa onto a stretcher, started an IV, asked questions William answered while Vivien stood frozen by the door, useless and terrified. At the hospital, William paced the emergency room while Vivien sat motionless in a plastic chair, her cream coat still buttoned, her hands folded in her lap like she was in a board meeting. But inside, she was breaking apart. This was her fault. She'd come here tonight, had forced this confrontation, had let Larissa overhear the truth without preparation or care. She'd been thinking about her own pain, her own need for answers, and she'd hurt her daughter. Again. A doctor emerged from the treatment area, her expression calm. "Mr. Hale? She's stable. The episode was stress-induced, as you suspected. We'd like to keep her overnight for observation, but she should make a full recovery." William sagged with relief. "Can I see her? She's asking for you. And..." The doctor glanced at Vivien. "She's asking for her mother, too." In the hospital room, Larissa lay in the bed, looking small and pale against the white sheets. An IV ran into her arm, and monitors beeped softly beside her. When Vivien and William entered, she turned her head toward them. "I'm sorry I fainted," she said in a small voice. That was dramatic. Despite everything, William managed to laugh. "You get that from your mother." Vivien approached the bed slowly, afraid to get too close, afraid her presence would cause more harm. "How are you feeling?" "Confused," Larissa said honestly. "And tired. And like everything I thought I knew was wrong." "I know the feeling," Vivien said softly. They stayed through the night. William dozed in the chair beside Larissa's bed while Vivien stood at the window, watching the city lights blur through her exhaustion. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting medications. And sometime near dawn, Larissa woke and found Vivien still standing there. "You really didn't know about me?" the girl asked quietly, not wanting to wake her father. Vivien turned from the window. "I really didn't. If I had known, I would have come for you. I would have given up everything to come for you. But you didn't give up everything. You became successful instead." The observation was delivered without malice, but it landed like a blade. Out of the mouths of children, Vivien thought, come the truths adults spend lifetimes avoiding. "Yes," she said, "I did. I built a career. I made money. I gained power. And I told myself it was because I'd lost everything else, so I might as well succeed at something. But really, I was just running away from the pain." Larissa considered this. "Dad says running away doesn't make the pain smaller. It just means you're tired when it catches up. Your dad is right." Vivien moved closer to the bed. "Larissa, I can't change the past 15 years. I can't give you back the mother you should have had. But I can tell you the truth now. I can tell you that I loved you from the moment I knew you existed. I loved you when I was 20 years old and terrified. I loved you on every Christmas I spent alone, mourning what I thought I'd lost. And I love you now, even though you don't know me, even though I haven't earned it." The girl studied her with those gray eyes that saw too much. "What are you going to do now?" "I'm going to make the people who lied to us answer for it," Vivien said. "And then I'm going to try, if your father allows it, to be part of your life. If you want me to be." William stirred in his chair, waking. He looked at Vivien, then at his daughter, and something in his expression shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it, somewhere down a very long road. The revelation came slowly over the following weeks, like light through a cracked door widening by degrees. Vivien hired a team of lawyers, different ones from her family's longtime firm, and had them begin the process of documenting everything. The altered hospital records, the falsified reports, the payments made to silent staff, the paper trail of deception that led directly back to her father's estate and the executors who had carried out his final wishes even after his death 5 years ago. Her mother was still alive, living in the family mansion on the North Shore. Vivien went to see her on a gray morning in late January, her first visit in 3 years. The house was exactly as she remembered. Pristine, cold, filled with expensive things, and empty of love. Her mother received her in the conservatory, surrounded by orchids that were tended by a professional gardener because Elizabeth Constance had never liked getting dirt under her fingernails. She was 62 years old and looked 50, maintained by the best cosmetic procedures money could buy. "Vivien," she said, not rising from her chair. "I have a daughter," Vivien said without preamble. "She's 8 years old. Her name is Larissa. You have a granddaughter you've never met because you and father lied to me for 15 years. Her mother's expression didn't change. "I see you've been investigating. You told me she was dead. We told you the situation was handled. You chose to interpret that as you wished. The coldness of it, the calculation, made Vivien feel like she was looking at a stranger. Or maybe she was finally seeing clearly for the first time. "I'm going public with this," Vivien said. "All of it. The falsified records, the coercion, everything. It will destroy the family name. It will probably destroy the company. I don't care." Now her mother did stand, her composure cracking slightly. "You would ruin everything your father built over a child born from a youthful mistake?" "That child is the only thing in my life that wasn't a mistake," Vivien said. "Everything else, every success, every achievement, it's all ashes. I built it on a foundation of grief that you created. You stole my daughter from me, and you let me believe she was dead for 15 years. There is no coming back from that." Her mother's face hardened. "If you go public, you'll lose your position. The board will vote you out. Shareholders will demand your resignation. You'll be left with nothing." "I'll be left with the truth," Vivien said. "And maybe, if I work very hard, and if she's generous enough to give me the chance, I'll be left with a relationship with my daughter. That's more than I have now." She walked out of the house and didn't look back. The news broke in February. An investigative journalist at the city's most respected newspaper received an anonymous package containing documents, medical records, and a detailed timeline of the deception. The story ran on the front page. Banking heiress discovers daughter she was told had died. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Vivien's company's stock dropped 12% in a day. The board called emergency meetings. Shareholders demanded answers, and Vivien stood in front of them all and confirmed every detail of the story, adding that she was resigning her position as chief executive officer, effective immediately. "I've spent 15 years building this company," she told the board in her final meeting, "and I've realized that I built it for all the wrong reasons. I was trying to prove I could succeed at something after I'd failed at being a mother. But I didn't fail. I was robbed of the chance to try, and now I'm taking that chance back." She walked out of the boardroom to flashing cameras and shouted questions, drove across town to the modest neighborhood where William and Larissa lived, and knocked on their door for the second time in 2 months. William opened it, paint under his fingernails, looking tired but less hostile than before. "I quit," Vivien said. "I told them everything. It's all over the news. I just wanted you to know before it gets worse." He studied her face. "How much did it cost you?" "Everything," she said. "And somehow it doesn't feel like enough." Larissa appeared behind her father, her color better now, her expression curious. "Does this mean you're going to have more time?" the girl asked Vivien. "Yes, if you want me to spend it with you." Larissa looked up at her father. William hesitated, then nodded slowly. "We can try," he said. "Slowly, carefully, with a lot of conversations and probably some therapy for all of us." "I can do slowly," Vivien said. "I'm good at being patient when something matters." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. 1 year later, on Christmas Eve, the park filled with families again. The same tree stood at the center, lights twinkling, children playing in fresh snow. But this time, 3 people walked through it together. William carried his portfolio, heading toward a gallery opening where his work was being featured in a proper exhibition for the first time. Larissa wore a new winter coat, red like the one from last year, but better quality. A gift from Vivien, who was still learning what her daughter liked and how to give without overwhelming. And Vivien walked beside them, not quite part of the family yet, but no longer entirely separate either. The centerpiece of William's exhibition was the painting, the one he'd created 15 years ago, of a young woman in a cream coat sitting in the snow, her expression captured in that moment between hope and despair. The gallery had offered to buy it for an impressive sum, but William had refused. Instead, it hung in the place of honor with a placard reading, "Portrait of Vivien, Christmas night," and a date from 15 years past. People gathered around it, admiring the technique, the emotion, the haunting quality of the subject's eyes. They didn't know the story behind it. They didn't know that the woman in the painting was standing in this very gallery, that the artist had painted it on the worst night of his life, that the child beside him was the reason for both the painting's creation and its salvation. After the exhibition opening, they walked back to the park together. William and Vivien followed more slowly, maintaining the careful distance they'd negotiated over the past year. "She wants to call you Mom," William said quietly. "She asked me last week if it would hurt my feelings." Vivien's breath caught. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that love doesn't divide, it multiplies. She can love me as her father and still have room to love you as her mother. It doesn't diminish what we've built together." "You're a better person than I am," Vivien said. "No, I just had more practice at failing and getting back up. You're learning." They reached the bench where it had all begun 1 year ago. Vivien sat down, and after a moment, William sat beside her. The snow fell gently around them, just as it had that first night. But this time, there was no coffee cup clutched in frozen fingers. No isolation, no lies. Larissa came running back, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright. "Can we get hot chocolate?" she asked. "The cafe by the ice rink is still open." "Of course," Vivien said, and was rewarded with her daughter's smile. So like her own, it still sometimes took her breath away. As they walked toward the lights and warmth of the cafe, Vivien thought about all the Christmas nights she'd spent alone, believing she'd lost everything, using that loss as both shield and excuse. She thought about the years William had spent raising their daughter by himself, never knowing if Vivien had abandoned them by choice or if something darker had occurred. She thought about Larissa, growing up with half the story, half the truth, half the family she deserved. Christmas wasn't magic, she'd learned. It wasn't about miracles or perfect redemptions or pain erased by the passage of time. It was simpler and harder than that. It was about people being brave enough to face the truth, to sit with the discomfort of what had been lost, and to choose love anyway. Not the easy love that came naturally, but the difficult love that required work and forgiveness, and the willingness to try again despite every reason to give up. The cafe was warm and crowded, filled with other families seeking shelter from the cold. William ordered their drinks while Larissa and Vivien found a small table near the window. Outside, the snow continued to fall, coating the park in fresh white, covering the old footprints and creating space for new ones. "Are you glad you found us?" Larissa asked suddenly, her hands wrapped around her hot chocolate, her expression serious. Vivien looked at her daughter, this miracle she hadn't known existed, this second chance she hadn't earned. "Finding you," she said carefully, "was like waking up after 15 years of sleepwalking. I didn't know how lost I was until I found my way back." "That's very poetic," Larissa said. "You sound like Dad." William returned with Vivien's coffee and his own tea, settling into the chair across from them. "Are you complaining about poetry again?" he asked his daughter with mock severity. "No," Larissa said, grinning. I'm just saying, you're both dramatic." They laughed, and Vivien felt something inside her chest loosen. Some knot of grief and shame that had been tied there for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. Outside, the church bells began to ring, marking midnight, marking Christmas. A year ago, those bells had signaled the end of everything Vivien thought she knew. Tonight, they marked a different kind of ending. The end of running, the end of hiding, the end of believing the lies. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something true.